What is going on, guys? My name is John and welcome back to yet another video. Ever since Generation 2, held items have influenced many aspects of the Pokemon series, and without them, lots of mechanics like evolution and competitive battling wouldn't be the same if they weren't around. A very underrated feature of the Pokemon games is that wild Pokemon have a chance to hold an item when you encounter it, and some of them can be extremely useful for your journey. There are tons of different Pokemon that can hold items, but what does it take to get them all? Today we're going to find out how easily you can steal every wild hold item in Pokemon Black and White. So before we get started with the video, let's go over a few bits of information for those who don't understand everything about wild held items. Every time you step in wild grass, you have the possibility of encountering a Pokemon that has a chance to hold an item. As of Generation 7, there are only 4 percentages that a held item can have when you encounter a Pokemon. These are 100%, 50%, 5%, and 1%. Because there are a ton of Pokemon that can hold items, a lot of them are repeated, so we're going to go about this as if we were starting right from the beginning of the game. But before we start grabbing everything, there are a couple of things that we can do to make this a lot easier for us. We're going to need to go to Wellspring Cave to grab the TM for the move Thief. This attacks the opponent and also takes their item as long as the user is not already holding one. This means that we don't have to catch any Pokemon, as we can literally just snag the item as we're knocking them out. Now let's get the Pokemon that we need. If we go to the Chargestone Cave, we can catch ourselves a Joltik. This Pokemon is one of the 9 Pokemon in these games that can have the ability Compound Eyes. If this Pokemon is in the front of the party, the chance for a wild Pokemon to be holding an item increases. This increases the chances to 60%, 20%, and 5%, which can still be a bit of trouble, but definitely not as hard as it was before. This ability works even if the Pokemon is fainted, which is a perfect opportunity to take advantage of another Pokemon. If we go to Route 9 and walk around the double grass for a bit, we have a 25% chance of encountering a high-level Gothorita. This Pokemon can learn Thief through TM, but it also has another purpose. This Pokemon also has the ability Frisk, which allows you to see the item that the Pokemon is holding. This means that we can find out right away when we get into battle if the Pokemon has the item that we're looking for. I'd like to know that this Pokemon is only available in Black, but the other 2 options you have for both of these games are the Shuppet line and Stantler, which would be a really random one to use. To make things a whole lot easier, I'd suggest leveling up your Pokemon as high as you can, because the farther you get into the game, the harder it gets. But with all the team building out of the way, we're now ready to get every item. So let's just jump right into it. Our first stop in this challenge is Route 1. A key feature to this generation is the wild interactable spots that are in the grass, sky, and water. On this route, we have a 100% chance of encountering an Audino with a shaking spot, but there are 2 items that we have to grab from it before we can move on. With Compound Eyes, we have a 60% chance to get an Oran Berry that heals 10 HP, but we can also get a Citrus Berry that heals 25% of your HP. Although we only have a 20% chance to find it, I managed to get one of these before finding anything else. Although we're technically not going in storyline order, there are a couple more items that we can grab on this route. If we surf around, we once again have a 100% chance of encountering Basculin. After only a few encounters, we can snap a Deep Sea Tooth at 20%. This item is used to evolve Clamperl into Huntail. The blue pattern of Basculin holds the other item to evolve into Gorpus, but you can only surf for them in the white version. However, if you find a surfing spot, you have a 100% chance to encounter the other pattern. This one is much more annoying because of how long the rippling spots can take to appear. I'm aware that I could use past powers to increase my chance, but I wanted to make this challenge a little more difficult because of how relatively straightforward this is. After a decent amount of encounters, we were able to get the Deep Sea Scale, bringing the total to 4 items. Our next stop is going to be the Dreamyard. In the basement area, we can encounter Raticate and Kricketune. Both Pokemon have a 20% chance for their items. Raticate can hold a Chillon Berry, which reduces normal type attacks, and Kricketune can hold a Metronome, which boosts the power of moves used in succession. This is also our first encounter with Dark Grass, which has a high chance of encountering more than 1 Pokemon at once. This works out really well because only these 2 Pokemon can hold items, and this has a lot of potential to speed things up later on as we progress. Heading west of here, we reach Route 3, where we can encounter a wild Blitzel. These have a 60% chance of holding the Cherry Berry, which heals you if you get paralyzed. Our next stop is going to be the Pinwheel Forest. Because this has 2 sections, we're first going to start with the outside section. We only need to grab items from Timpole and Sock, but at this point we've reached another new mechanic. Although we can encounter it in regular grass, we're going to need to encounter Sock in the doubles grass because you can only obtain an extra item from this type of encounter. Before we do that, if we encounter Timpole, we have a 60% chance to hold a Person Berry that heals Confusion. Sock, on the other hand, is not nearly as simple. This Pokemon has a 20% chance to hold a Black Belt, which boosts the power of fighting moves, but it also has a 5% chance to hold the Expert Belt in the darker grass. Considering that this is a 10% encounter, this means that we have a 0.5% chance of finding a sock holding the item we need with every encounter. Yeah, not as easy as it seems. This took me over 2 hours to find one, which is well over the 1 over 200 odds. I was basically shiny hunting at this point, which was also unsuccessful, but thankfully we can easily collect the expert belt, which boosts the power of super effective moves. Even when we head inside the forest, we've got some difficult items to obtain. Starting with the standard walking Pokemon, we can find Venipede holding the Poison Barb, which increases the power of poison moves, and the Pecha Berry, which heals you if you're poisoned. Sewaddle has a 20% chance to hold the Mental Herb, which heals you if you're infatuated, or is affected by moves like Disable or Taunt. Now it's time to take on the shaking spots. Pansage, Pansear, and Panpour can all appear through these spots, but that's the smallest part of our issue. Each of them have a 60% chance to hold an Oran Berry, while the other item is 20%. Together, they only take up 30% of the encounters, and Audino commands pretty much the rest at 65%. I was actually really lucky with this one because the first items that Pansage and Pansear had were the ones that I was looking for. Panpour straight up refused to appear for the first 30 minutes, but after about an hour, I managed to grab them all. You can find Pansage holding the Alka Berry, which reduces fire-type attacks, Pansear holding the Pasho Berry, which reduces water attacks, and Panpour who is holding, you guessed it, the Rindo Berry, which reduces the power of grass-type attacks. This brings the total to 16 items. After running through the Sky Arrow Bridge and the streets of Castelia City, we finally reach our next location, Route 4. Here we can encounter Darumaka, who has a 60% chance to hold a Ross Berry, which heals the burn condition. The lesser common Scraggy has a 20% chance to hold the Shed Shell, which allows the holder to switch out, regardless of being in a trapping move or ability like Fire Spin or Arena Trap. The hardest one in this route is Love Disc, but that's really only because it has a 5% encounter rate while surfing. If you manage to get a water spot though, it bumps it up to 65%, which is definitely worth it if you need to get a bunch of this item. It has a 60% chance to hold the Heart Scale, which can be exchanged to relearn moves that the Pokemon learned at an earlier level. Before we head out of here, we're going to take a quick stop at the route's extension, the Desert Resort. This applies to both the outside and the inside areas, but here we can encounter Maractus, who has a 20% chance to hold the Miracle Seed. This item boosts the power of grass moves. This desert also has access to the Relic Castle, where we can encounter Yamask. They have a 20% chance to hold the Spell Tag, which boosts the power of Ghost-type moves. After heading back to Route 4, we eventually reach Nimbasa City, and this is kind of our first location where we can choose which way we want to go. Because we're loosely following the storyline path, we're going to go west to Route 5. The only Pokemon that we have to find is Trubbish, but once again there are 2 items that we have to collect. We have a 20% chance to get Black Sludge, which restores your HP if you're a poison type, but hurts everyone else. If we encounter one in the Devil's Grass, we have a 5% chance to get a Nugget. This is probably the worst rarest item that you can get in this game, but I think it was a really funny touch to add to the lore. This one took about 30 minutes to find, bringing the total to 23 items. After heading through Driftville City and its drawbridge, we reach Route 6 where we can surf for Poliwhirl. This is also a 65% encounter rate in the fishing spots, but it has a 20% chance to hold the King's Rock. This obviously evolves Poliwhirl to Politoed, but it also increases the chance of making the opponent flinch by 10%. And now we have to take on one of the hardest Pokemon in the game, Foongus. Didn't think I'd ever say that in a sentence. This is one of the very few Pokemon in the game that is coded to have 3 different items that you can obtain from it. This means you have an 85% chance for Foongus to hold an item every encounter, but an overwhelming majority of those encounters are going to be a tiny mushroom. The big mushroom is 20%, but the ball mushroom is 5%, which we're obviously no stranger to, but unless you're really lucky, you're probably going to be seeing everything but that. On top of that, it's only a 15% encounter in the dark grass, which was just a little bit better than Sock, so after about 50 minutes, I managed to get one. The only purpose for these is to be sold to a maniac, so they're really not worth the grind. At the end of this route is the Chargestone Cave. Ferroseed have a 20% chance to hold the Sticky Barb, which reduces your health by 1/8 of your max if you're holding it, or come into physical contact with it. This one was very interesting to do, but that's mostly because when I used Thief on it, it didn't say or do the animation that I collected the item. I'm well aware that you can't steal an item if you already have one, but I tried this twice and both times I just finished the battle with the item attached to Gothitelle. I'm not sure if my game was bugging out or if it's just an oversight by the developers, but either way we can move on out from here. Moving forward through a couple routes, we reach Twist Mountain, which has definitely one of the worst ones on the list. Cryogonal is the Pokemon that we have to hunt down, but it has a measly 1% encounter rate throughout the entire mountain. There are a couple things that we can do to make this easy. Oh. Well, I was gonna talk about how you can improve its odds, but it was literally the first encounter I found in the mountain. So, yeah. Wild Kraken will have a 20% chance to hold the Never Melt Ice. This increases the power of ice moves by 20%. After exiting the mountain, we reach Icarus City. Before we take on the next route, we're going to head to the Dragon Spiral Tower for 2 more items. On the first floor, we can very easily encounter Golett and Drudigan. Golett has a 20% chance to hold Light Clay, which extends the duration of Reflect and/or Light Screen. Drudigan also has a 20% chance to hold the Dragon Fang, which boosts Dragon-type moves. East of Icarus City is Route 8, where we can find a Stunfisk with a 20% chance to hold Soft Sand. Just like the Dragon Fang, this increases the power of Ground-type moves. Route 9 contains Garbodor, and just like Trubbish, it has a hidden gem behind all its trash. You can get a big nugget off of them, but once again, it's a 5% chance to appear. Luckily, I found mine in only 3 encounters, which brings the total to 33 wild items, and finishes just about every mandatory main story location. Now let's focus on the postgame. Now there are a couple areas that I forgot to touch, but not to worry, we'll get to them in a second. We're going to first head east of Route 1 to get to Route 17. Here we can fish for Horsey, which has a 20% chance to drop its evolution item, the Dragon Scale. Past here is Route 18, where we have to take care of another 5% item. Crustle has a chance to hold a rare bone that can be sold, and it also has a 20% chance to hold the Hardstone, which increases Rock-type moves. Speaking of Pokemon that can hold this item, if we head to the Wellspring Cave, we can encounter Roggenrola. These have a much better chance of holding an Everstone, which prevents a Pokemon from evolving if held. The next Pokemon we have to find is actually a static encounter. After going through the maze in the Relic Castle basement, we can battle the most legendary non-legendary in this game, Volcarona. Because you can only battle one of these per game, you have a 100% chance of it holding the Silver Powder, which increases the power of Bug-type moves. Now let's take on the new routes. Heading east of Nimbasa City, we can go to Route 15. Here we can encounter Fearow and Marowak. Fearow has a 20% chance to hold the Sharp Beak, which increases flying moves, and Marowak has the same chance for the Thick Club, which doubles its attack stat if either Cubone or Marowak holds it. For those who don't know, this gives Marowak a base attack stat of 160, which is ridiculous. If we go to Route 14, we have a 5% chance to encounter Shuckle, but in turn we have a 100% chance for it to hold Berry Juice, which heals 20 HP. Past on Delatown is Route 13. In the grass, we have a 20% chance to encounter Swellow, which can hold the Charty Berry that reduces the power of an opponent's Rock-type move. In the water, we can grab a bunch of items that are just meant for selling. If we surf around, we can encounter Staryu that has a 60% chance to hold Stardust, and a 20% chance to hold a Star Piece. If we fish, we can find Shelder, who has a 60% chance for a Pearl, or a 20% chance for a Big Pearl. This brings a total to 46 items. Now it's time to go to the last really large location, the Giant Chasm. The first area we're going to look at is the cave. In here we can find Sneasel, which have a 60% chance to hold a Grip Claw, which extends the moves like Fire Spin for another 5 turns. Our freebie for this section is going to be Jinx, who has a 100% chance to hold an Aspear Berry that heals the freeze condition. The Plains area is where things start to really pick up. Metang has a 20% chance to hold the Metal Coat, which evolves Onix and Scyther, but also increases the power of Steel moves. Ditto has a 60% chance to hold the Quick Powder, which doubles Ditto's speed stat, but it also has a 20% chance to hold the Metal Powder, which increases Ditto's defense and special defense by 50%. The last Pokemon here is Clefairy. This is once again a 3-item Pokemon. They have a 60% chance to hold the Lepidberry that heals 10 power points, a 20% chance to hold a Moonstone to evolve it, and a 5% chance to hold a Comet Shard that you can sell for a whopping 60,000. From here we can head to Route 12. On this route we have a 20% chance for Rapidash to have the Shucca Berry, which reduces the power of a ground-type attack, and a 20% chance for Sunkern to have the Koba Berry, which reduces flying. We also have a 100% chance for Combi to hold Honey, which allows you to instantly encounter a Pokemon. To finish up our last few items, we have to head to Route 11, and finally the Abundant Shrine. On Route 11 we can encounter Zangoose, which has a 20% chance to hold a Quick Claw, that has a chance to let the move remove first, which it did. Weasel can be found in the water with a 20% chance to hold a Walk-On Berry, which reduces the power of electric-type attacks. At the shrine we can surf for Slowpoke, which has a 20% chance to hold a Lagging Tail that reduces the holder's speed. The last item is held by Wild Chimecho. This is actually the only Pokemon you have to catch because it has a 20% chance to hold a Colbur Berry, which reduces the power of Dark-type attacks. So if I attack it with Thief, it'll consume the item beforehand. This brings a total to 61 items. So now we're done, right? Well, we actually have a couple more that we can obtain. In the post game of Black and White, there are daily swarms that you can encounter, and some of these Pokemon can hold items. On Route 1, Farfetch have a 20% chance to hold a stick, which increases Farfetch's critical hit ratio. Shroomish on Route 11 have a 20% chance to hold a Kabia berry that reduces poison type attacks. Yanma on Route 14 have a 20% chance to hold the Wide Lens, which increases the holder's accuracy. And Mankey on Route 15 have a 20% chance to hold a Payapa berry, which reduces the power of psychic type attacks. This brings the total to a whopping 65 items, and every item that you can technically steal from a wild Pokemon in Black and White. But how did I do? So let's review. I say technically because there are a few additional things to consider. In Pokemon White, you can go to the White Forest, where there are a ton of different Pokemon you can encounter. If you played White, you can get these 4 Pokemon, but it would take a ton of in real life time to do, and the Pokemon that appear are pretty much random. The last thing to note is the Pokemon that can hold items, but just aren't able to be encountered in the wild. I'm not going to list off every single one, but these are the Pokemon that are left, which is pretty interesting to think about. Odds are these are just left over from previous generation data, but there is a strong possibility that some of these Pokemon were planned to be in the game, but were cut partly through the development process. Overall, this is a super tedious challenge, but I made this video in the same fashion as the berry video, where I tried to show all the interesting items you could obtain, the lore behind some of them, and maybe teach you something about an item that you didn't know about. If there was something new that you learned, let me know in the comment section below. Per usual, I don't recommend trying this, but if you're interested in checking this out, I've included a link in the description with a spreadsheet that I made for all the Pokemon for both games. Aside from that, that's all there is to say about stealing every wild held item in Pokemon Black and White. And that's going to do it for today's video. If you liked the video, leave a like and consider subscribing, as I'll be uploading more videos soon. If you have any suggestions for videos that you'd like to see, leave a comment below. Follow me on Twitter to keep updated with new videos as they come out. Other than that, I'd like to thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.